all been to a lot of conferences. People often joke that crypto is, mostly spending money on flights and hotels and going to random countries to meet all your crypto friends who live in random parts of the world where they don't have to pay taxes. But you still see multiple projects in the same area working on problems in silos. And it's kind of like, well, if everyone is going to all these conferences together, why aren't people working together more? So we want this to be a productive conference. We don't want people to come here to waste their time. We're not trying to waste anyone's time. You probably have gotten some aggressive emails from me about being efficient with time. And I think that's really important for this to have an outcome and actually be productive. How many of you raise your hand if you've actually thought about the research problems that you want to explore with your peers? Fuck yeah. So I'm going to share some things that helped me and have helped Plasma Group in, discussing research and academic things where your ego is often at stake. You should take notes and think about what you want to say. If you want your peers to give you the respect of listening to you, then you should give them the respect of saying good stuff that they want to listen to. There's this person called Esther Perel. She's a relationship therapist, and I think a lot of her advice that she gave in her TED Talk applies here, which is that when someone says something that you don't agree with, you can often only listen for 5 seconds before you start mentally formulating your rebuttal. I ask that you attempt. It's really hard. I've tried. It's really hard. But just try. When someone says something that you don't agree with, suspend your disbelief, try to listen to what they're saying, and give them an opportunity to help them hone their ideas instead of immediately expressing dissent. And third is to reflect. We're, in a college setting, which is kind of fun because students take notes. And we're not that different. We're still students. We're still learning. People are working on cool, cutting-edge shit that has never been done before. So we should take notes. And that will help everyone, at the end of the conference reflect. And we do hope that since y'all didn't, pay for a ticket or whatever, this is a pretty low-budget event. The only thing we really want is tangible outcomes to be birthed. So that's all I have to say. Thank you to our sponsors, Plasma Group, the Ethereum Foundation, University of Toronto Blockchain Group, Paradigm, UMA, Uniswap, Russell Verbeeten, and Tosh Dianis. Woo! And A Capital, which is not on here, but will be later. Thank you, everyone. And please welcome, hey, Makira, how do I get to the slide? Please welcome Hart from UMA.
Okay, cool. How do I go forward? Great. Perfect. Okay. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, great. So I'm Hart Lambur. I'm from Universal Market Access, or UMA, as we like to call ourselves. So what's UMA? UMA is a decentralized financial contracts platform. And our mission is really to enable universal market access. The big vision here is that we want to help create a protocol for what we'll call risk transfer. We want financial risk to be able to move freely across the internet without a centralized authority or a single point of failure, in the same way that information moves across the internet today. Our platform really consists of two interwoven concepts. The first is what we call self-enforcing contract design patterns. It's a mouthful, but we really talk about financial smart contract patterns that do useful things. The first example of this, the first thing built using our technology, is what we're calling a tokenized derivative product. We created an S&P, or rather people using our technology, created an S&P tracking token. This is a crypto token that uses synthetic derivatives to track the S&P 500 so that anyone with magic internet money can actually buy access in this financial product. That first proof of concept product launched in March. had more than $1 million of value in the contract, and successfully expired on May 15th, a few weeks ago. The second part of what we're working on is an Oracle mechanism with what we're calling economic guarantees. And the idea here is that smart contracts, if you can't prove that the data inputs of smart contracts cannot be manipulated for profit, then your smart contract that does whatever useful financial decentralized finance thing you're doing is kind of worthless. So today we wanted to go through and introduce our design for how we can actually add economic guarantees to an Oracle. And we wanted to explain why we think this is critical to the development of decentralized finance. All right, so to get into it, why do economic guarantees matter for oracles? So it's useful to actually go back and think about the fiat world for a second. So stating the obvious, legal contracts are, for things like financial products or for anything really, are really damn useful. But they depend on counterparties believing that the contract and any reference data cannot be manipulated. So here we have our toy example of Alice and Bob. It's meant to, they've got $1 million contract between the two of them. This is meant to be a pretty abstract contract type, but let's for our example say it's just a derivative agreement between the two of them where they each put in 500 grand of value. This contract references some external resource or some external reference for that payout, and Bob and Alice both believe this contract will be honored because in the fiat world we have these useful concepts of identity and of rule of law and laws against fraud and bribery. And very simply put, Bob can't go and bribe or corrupt the external reference to this contract because he faces a very large external cost, namely jail. You know, there's this other external cost in the fiat world system that prevents these things from being manipulated. As we all know, this doesn't exist in blockchain space. There's no concept of fraud, and frankly, there's nothing to prevent anyone from bribing anybody, nor should there be. We know that contracts and the data sources going into those contracts will be manipulated for profit and probably should be, if they can. So in other words, Bob is free and okay to bribe to his heart's content if he can profitably do so. This really becomes a problem at scale. So if we take the same example contract that Bob and Alice have, $1 million contract, and we duplicate it 5 times here, where Bob assumes a fake identity, pseudo-anonymous, and is on one side of all 5 of these contracts, and enters into them with here, Charlie, Dave, Eva, Fred. He now has, if we assume they both put in 500 grand each, he now has a $2.5 million incentive to go and try to bribe this external price reference to corrupt this system. And of course, this is unbounded. You can keep scaling this. And the incentive Bob has to corrupt the price reference for this contract keeps growing. So this is the problem. This is why we argue that oracles need economic guarantees. The core reason is that in a permissionless public blockchain like Ethereum, private economic incentives are the only tool we have to incentivize behavior. And so in order for us to be able to trust a smart contract that relies on off-chain inputs via an oracle, we must be able to prove that an attacker has no way to profit from manipulating the oracle system. And the point we make here is that we think all of DeFi really depends on this. It's going to be impossible for us, in the vein of scaling Ethereum and scaling decentralized finance, it's going to be impossible for us to move trillions of dollars of economic value onto decentralized financial smart contracts if we can't have these sorts of economic guarantees that prove that these contracts won't be manipulated. Okay, so another core point here, like when do we exactly need these oracles with economic guarantees? The process we're talking about is an expensive process. We're really if you really think about it, this is a consensus mechanism for external or real world data. It's ideally the sort of oracle that should be called relatively infrequently. And we think the ideal use cases here are for disputes and for settlements. To throw in an example for Dan Robinson's Rainbow Networks, that's a state channel with synthetic derivatives. Settling or resolving a disputed state channel is a great use for this type of design. Going back to like the legal analogy, people write private contracts all the time. They write those contracts without the intention of litigating them, or at least most people do. We think the same concepts should apply in the blockchain space. A lot of smart contracts should be written with the intention of no need to litigate them, but there needs to be a credible mechanism, again, with an economic guarantee that can validate what that settlement, what that contract should settle to. Lastly, we'd add that this design we think is highly complementary to many other Oracle projects out there. Sergey, I believe, is speaking after me. Sergey from Chainlink, and Chainlink has got a different design, different objectives, where it's much better geared towards providing frequent on-chain data, and we think our design is very complementary to that. Okay, so that's why we need these economic guarantees. How do we go about building an Oracle with economic guarantees? Well, we'll start by formally defining what we mean by an honest Oracle. So the starting premise here is that all oracles on a blockchain system are corruptible. There is always some price you can pay, some bribe you can pay to corrupt an oracle mechanism and to produce dishonest behavior. We define the smallest possible bribe we can pay as our cost of corruption, or COC is the acronym we use in the slides. Separately, there exists some maximum amount of profit that can be stolen if we were to corrupt this oracle, and we define this max profit as our profit from corruption. It then follows, very logically, that in order for an oracle to remain honest, in order for there to be no economic incentive to corrupt this oracle system, we need the cost of corruption to be greater than the profit of corruption, or in other words, we need the COC greater than PFC inequality to hold true. So just to hammer this home, going back to our Bob and Alice contract, if Bob and Alice both put in 500 grand, the profit from corruption number in this contract would be that 500 grand number. Bob could steal 500 grand if he were to control the oracle and control the price inputs to the contract. He could steal Alice's 500 grand. Alice could do the same thing. The cost of corruption is simply the bribe Bob would have to pay to corrupt the price input. Very simply, if Bob can pay less than 500 grand to corrupt this system, he can and should do that, and he'll walk away with money and the contract will be ruined. So we need to keep the cost of corruption greater than the PFC number here. All right, so with that framework in mind, this concept or this problem of trying to build an oracle with economic guarantees becomes a bit more tractable. So really we break it down into 3 steps. The first step is that we have to measure our cost of corruption. Second step, measure our profit from corruption. Third step is to design a mechanism that keeps our cost of corruption greater than our profit of corruption and prove that this will work. So how do we do this? Here's the high-level overview of how our system hangs together. We measure our cost of corruption with tradable voting rights. This is a Schelling point style system, heavily inspired by Vitalik's Schelling coin post from a couple years back and things like Truthcoin and Augur. We have freely tradable voting tokens where token holders are rewarded for voting correctly and penalized otherwise. And because these freely traded voting tokens allow us to calculate, use a market to reveal the cost of what it would take to buy a controlling number of these tokens, we can use this concept to actually calculate our cost of corruption. We'll go into more detail on that in a second. Secondly, how do we measure our profit from corruption? Well, the realization here is that in order for us to secure our system, we need to know what we're securing. So we require all contracts to register with the system and to report their individual profit from corruption values. The system-wide PFC number can then be calculated by summing all these individual contract PFC numbers. Lastly, and most interestingly, how do we enforce this inequality? We do this using what we're calling a variable fee policy. So if and when the market cap of the voting rights are high enough, the voting tokens are high enough, The cost of corruption is above our floor, and we don't have to do anything. The system is secure and arguably operates costlessly. The challenge becomes what happens as the cost of corruption approaches the floor. What we do is we propose a buyback system where we programmatically levy repeated buybacks on the voting rights to enforce this profit from corruption, this cost of corruption, profit from corruption inequality. And we'll go into more detail on how that works. All right. So, uh-oh, my math didn't show up. Oh no. That's an Internet Explorer fail.
You should use Beamer.
Sorry?
Use Beamer and then convert it to PDF and then.
Yeah, I don't have time to do that. Oh, guys, I'm sorry.
Is there
We've got the.
behind the screen?
There's a chalkboard there.
Yeah.
You can also just tell us what the math is.
Yeah, I'll tell you guys what the math is. I'm sorry. There's a few slides of math here. We got like the LaTeX and the notes down at the bottom if you guys want to look at that. So yeah, my apologies. All right. Well, conceptually, we got to measure this cost of corruption. Okay. So the cost of corruption here is going to be whatever, to control the oracle, an attacker needs to control half of all the participating tokens, the tokens that are participating in the voting process. In our math, we define a variable eta as the percentage of non-participating tokens, and S is our total token supply. And it follows then that an attacker needs to control half of the participating tokens. So what this math looks like is 1 minus eta, that's all the participating tokens, divided by 2 times the token supply. That's what an attacker needs to control in order to be able to push the oracle to their heart's content. We then define a floor price, we'll call it P floor. We then define a floor price P floor, that's the cost at which it would cost an attacker to control those Y tokens. And so our cost of corruption is then equal to this P floor price times this Y tokens that an attacker needs to operate or control the system. Cool. Next goes to measure our profit from corruption. So as stated earlier, in order to secure the system, we need to measure the total value at risk or total value secured by the system. And so to do this, we require all contracts to register with the system and report their own individual profit from corruption number for that individual contract. The system-wide PFC number can then be calculated by simply summing the individual PFC numbers for all those contracts. So the math here is actually pretty simple. The PFC equals just the summation of the PFC for all the individual contracts. This brings up the concept of parasitic usage. So the problem here is like, okay, well, that's all well and good, but how do you prevent people from using your system incorrectly or from unauthorized usage? And we can really break that down into a couple angles. So first of all, there is controlling access to the system itself. We need to define an interface by which all contracts using the system comply with. And that interface requires that the contracts report their individual profit from corruption number correctly, and also that they will pay their fees when required. It's pretty untenable for us to audit each contract that wants to use the system to actually approve or validate that it's calculating its PFC correctly. So instead, what we propose are what we're calling bytecode templates. These are relatively generic contract implementations that have audited PFC math and have flexible variables that can be inputted to do lots of useful things. And what we then do is we then require the oracle. The oracle only responds to requests from authorized bytecode templates and denies requests from those that are not known to the system. Cool. Then there's the whole concept of true parasitic usage. What prevents Bob and Alice from, say, instead of entering into a $1 million contract, let's say Bob and Alice enter into a $1 authorized contract and then create a parasitic contract for $1 million less $1 that resolves to whatever that authorized contract says. This is a big problem. And if we can't handle or get a grasp around parasitic usage, it breaks all the economic guarantees of our system. So there's really two ways we see this parasitic contract working. The first way is that it reads the data directly. The parasitic contract reads the data directly from the authorized contract and just uses that data for its own calculations. We think we can mostly prevent against this by using private variables and recording Oracle data only into private variables. We are aware that because the block hash headers are recorded on the blockchain, it is possible to verify private variables on chain, but that process is pretty expensive. We'd love to talk to the group more about this later on. The second challenge is what happens if the parasitic contract pays out, uses the final payouts of the authorized contract and just scales them up. So if the dollar contract pays 25 cents to Bob and 75 cents to Alice, the parasitic contract just reads those payouts and then multiplies it by 999,000 times. The way we get around that is by what we're calling fuzzing these contracts. So we insert a delay between the calculation of the final payouts and when they actually happen. And during that delay period, we allow third parties to insert extra money into the payouts of the authorized contract. And so if somebody adds 5 cents to the 25 cents Bob is going to receive, that screws up the payout for the parasitic contract and breaks the incentives of actually creating this parasitic version. Okay, so that's the long tangent on parasitic usage. Going back here and defining our inequality. Again, we're missing the math, but what we are doing here is we're taking our formula for how we calculate our cost of corruption, we're taking our formula for how we calculate our profit from corruption, and we're just plugging them into that inequality, and then rearranging to calculate a floor price that we're calling P floor. And what we have is an inequality where if this floor price is greater than, and the math looks like 2 times the profit corruption over 1 minus eta times the total token supply, you're not going to keep that in your head. LaTeX is there if you want to read that. We've got math. I'm sorry? Oh, thanks, Jane. That's cool. Great strategy. So on your Telegram, you got screenshots. So the floor price here is what we then need to maintain in order for this economic guarantee to remain satisfied. One note in the white paper that is all shared and that you guys can look at, we define this concept of a safe price that's just some buffer above the floor price we need to maintain. So the safe price just gives us a little bit added resiliency. To a little bit added redundancy to how this works. Okay. So the big question then goes as to how do we maintain this safe price target? Well, what we do is we initiate programmatic repeated token buybacks if the Oracle price drops below our target. All the purchase tokens are burned, reducing the token supply and increasing the market price P of the voting token. The funds needed to conduct these buybacks are raised by collecting fees F from contracts using the system. So the program logic here is actually pretty simple. Each voting period, we calculate our target price, P safe, by observing the system-wide profit from corruption. We measure our current market price P, and then if the current price is below the target price, we calculate the fees F that we need to collect to conduct the buyback. Interesting side note, we can actually use the math behind an automated market maker like Uniswap as our model to calculate the size of the fee we need to collect. We then collect the fees with our taxation logic and go and conduct our buyback. At one level, this seems like a pretty simple program for us to operate at each stage in our Oracle voting process. But the skeptics in the room should be like, well, hey, does this actually work? Like, why does the market believe this inequality will be maintained? And the meta answer to that is really that we're using the blockchain to solve this problem of credible commitment. What's happening here is that because this logic is programmatically written into our system, there is absolute certainty that the buyback will happen, that the fees will be collected. And because of this credible commitment in our code of how this works, we believe that the market incentives here, the game theory, is to keep this inequality in check. All right. So, the cost to use the system. Again, we're missing the math, but conceptually, you guys can actually, I think, make sense of this. The cool feature of this design is that we can actually calculate a fair value for the token at any point in time. The fair value for the token is the net present value of all future buybacks, where future buybacks are this fee F at time t times the profit from corruption that fee is collected on at times t. So what this would show is the sum of all future buybacks discounted back to today on the right-hand side of the equation. And on the left-hand side, that's our market cap of the token. So what's really interesting about this realization or this model is that that because of future expectations of buybacks, the system can actually operate costlessly during periods of realized or expected growth. And all we're really saying there is that if the market expects larger buybacks in the future, and it could be in the far, far future, the market price of the token discounted back to today will be above the profit from corruption level that the token needs to be above to secure the system and support this inequality. At steady state, when there's no growth in the usage of the system anymore, the token price will then settle or collapse to whatever compensation voters demand in return for their efforts. So this is going to be whatever voters require for both the effort of running a voting node and for their cost of capital. All right, so where are we in our implementation? The code for the first version of this implementation is shockingly close to complete. We're a few weeks out, and that'll be on our GitHub. The white paper that we've shared with this group will be beautified and publicly distributed after we get feedback really from you guys in this workshop. The first version of our Oracle we intend to release on testnet this summer, and our intention is to follow with a mainnet implementation very shortly. The other thing we're working on are example contracts, so simple, useful contracts that interface with the Oracle system and will allow developers to play and experiment with what we're doing. Our questions for the workshop. Actually, really, question 0 here is skepticism or kind of pushback around this concept of economic guarantees in oracles. We'd love to hear your feedback on how that works and its importance in the system or in the ecosystem. And then our other questions are to hear feedback and skepticism on our Oracle design. We want to dive deep on any potential attack vectors, especially our approach to parasitic usage. And we generally love to hear what you all think is needed or required to scale decentralized finance generally, or even more broadly, how to scale smart contract usage. And so, no pictures either. Okay. There were 4 headshots here of the 4 of us that are here. Me, Matt, Roz, Utaro, all sitting right there. Come find us. We'd love to collaborate. We'd love to get feedback. And yeah, thanks.
And we have 2 presentations, so we're going to
Yes, I combined all of them together.
and,
So it's all just one PDF.
and where it said threshold signatures, that's where
Yeah.
you started combining.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay, great. Thank you.
So what else? You can put mine up afterwards?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. And so,
So keyboard's here.
keyboards here. Great. Okay, great. Okay, great. So I should just jump in? Everybody can hear me, right? I don't need a mic or anything?
You need a mic
We
for
should
the
use
live
the
stream.
mic for the live stream.
This
The
thing?
one right in front of you, yeah.
There's like two glued
Just
together.
the
Six
top
glued mics. Okay, great. Hi everyone. So yeah, we're going to be discussing oracles. I think first, usually I like to create some shared context about the significance of oracles, which I think the vast majority of you have. So I'll kind of just blow through that. And then we'll look at our approach in terms of decentralization, how oracles make binding commitments to smart contracts, and then how we use multiple approaches in conjunction with decentralization, like trusted execution environments. So generally speaking, I think everybody's aware of the problem. Smart contracts can't speak with the data they need to expand. Fundamentally, this affects, in our opinion, the majority of contracts. And this problem basically keeps Ethereum from scaling into more useful use cases. So it's not necessarily the scalability of Ethereum on the level of its own transactions. It's more the scalability of Ethereum to be useful for the majority of use cases, the ones beyond token movement. Fundamentally, I think what we'll see when we have working oracles is a similar shift like the one we've seen historically. So we saw a shift from Bitcoin multi-signature as the only smart contract into protocol smart contracts in 2013 and 14. That's when a lot of us got into the space. That's when I got involved, when we started building the very first smart contracts, because this new capability to use various types of smart contracts emerged. Then Ethereum did a very good job of taking us from these protocol-based smart contracts to scriptable contracts. That expansion in capabilities for developers created the large explosion in value we've seen over the past year and a half, 2 years. And we think the next iteration, which logically makes sense, is that as you expand the features, now all of a sudden you have the ability to build entirely new categories of contracts. And that's really the outcome that we're seeking to achieve, is scale Ethereum in the sense that it can talk to all these inputs and outputs, and it can therefore be useful for all these other environments and use cases. Fundamentally, this means creating an oracle, a blockchain middleware, which I'm sure most of you here are familiar with the concept of oracles. And in the process of making these oracles, we've come to the conclusion that end-to-end reliability is particularly important. So the core concept is that if a part of your smart contract setup is insecure, then your entire smart contract setup pretty much isn't very useful to the customer. And that's why the reliability of oracles, what we really want to do, we want to expand what Ethereum can do in terms of its capabilities to interact with useful systems, but we want to retain the guarantees of reliability and security that make smart contracts so useful. So fundamentally, we're just trying to make these two dynamics work together to scale what Ethereum's capable of, but retain security. Now, the fundamentals of our approach, which we'll go into more detail over this talk, and which we're thrilled to hear your feedback about, is the core approach is the same approach that Ethereum itself takes to secure the contracts. The core approach focuses on decentralization. So what it seeks to do is just the way that Ethereum has multiple node operators computing contract state changes, we seek to have multiple oracles that can compute the accuracy of an input, and we allow you to choose the degree of decentralization you want. So our system doesn't have a predefined amount of decentralization that somebody has to use. We allow people to scale up or down that they want 3 nodes of a certain level of quality, or 5 or 10 or 50, depending on their need for decentralization and depending on their trust in each node in their oracle network. Now, the ability to make each of those nodes reliable basically comes down to a binding commitment. The binding commitment in our case comes through something called the service agreement. So this is an on-chain commitment by an oracle to a smart contract that it will provide certain types of data. And in a Chainlink oracle network, all the oracles make a commitment to provide this input. The larger the oracle network, the more nodes need to come to consensus. And therefore, the 1 or 2 or few nodes that deviate from the consensus, depending on the type of consensus you choose to implement, are generally considered wrong. And then they're penalized according to deposits and slashing and various methods related to proof of stake and these types of ideas. But fundamentally, that's the idea, is that just the way that smart contract state changes are made reliable, the foundational idea there, the foundational idea of our whole space, is that the security model of decentralization provides a greater degree of security and reliability for a certain type of data, whether it's a contract record or a state change or whatever it is. So that's fundamentally what we're basing this on. And then you also need the binding commitments between the contract and the oracle to be reliable. The third part of our approach is something called defense in depth. So the oracle software that we make is meant to be secure both on-chain and off-chain. So oracles are generally made up of two pieces of software. They have an on-chain component, which is commonly a contract that represents an interface which the requesting contract interacts with. And then you have an off-chain component, and the off-chain component is responsible for fulfilling the commitment that the on-chain contract made. And therefore like for example, we've launched an Ethereum mainnet. Before we did that, we had 3 security audits. So that's securing the on-chain part of the code and being very rigorous about making sure that that code is secure and reliable, so it doesn't introduce various kinds of attacks or vulnerabilities into the contracts that are using it or relying on it. And then the other part of making a good piece of Oracle software is securing the off-chain part of the code, and sometimes even securing it in a way that protects it from the node operator themselves. So even from the node operator running the off-chain Oracle software. So fundamentally, I'm just going to run through some of the logic of the initial approach for decentralization, and then we'll jump into a new approach we've recently launched called threshold signatures. Well, not cold threshold signatures, but our approach to threshold signatures, which has created, as far as we can tell, a 1,000x increase on the efficiency of how large Oracle networks can interact with Ethereum. So fundamentally, I think the way to view what the right model is commonly to think about what model we're trying to avoid or what failure scenarios we're trying to avoid. And fundamentally speaking, I think the failure scenario we're trying to avoid is one where you have a single centralized Oracle, right? Because the fundamental promise of our space is not that there's one trusted third party controlling the entire outcome of a transaction. The fundamental promise of our space is that there's multiple independent node operators computing highly reliable contract state changes and storing that data in a way that everybody can rely on, so much so that they don't even need to keep redundant copies, right? And fundamentally, if we build in some kind of singular trusted third party that can fundamentally control that transaction, that doesn't seem to coincide with the security model of our space, fundamentally speaking. So to solve this, I mean, it's basically the creation of an Oracle network. It's basically the application of decentralization to oracles, right? So if you have multiple independent node operators that are Sybil resistant, so they're independent, you have larger and larger numbers of them. Once again, the amount that a user feels they need, not some arbitrary amount that we force and dictate them to consume at large costs. And then once you've decentralized the Oracle and middleware layer, you can then go on to decentralize the data layer. So usually in our experience of building these smart contracts for large enterprises, together with various smart contract teams, generally speaking, the way this looks is, okay, we have decentralization reliability at this core smart contract state change level. Now we want to acquire it at increasingly outward bound levels. So that's initially the middleware, and then eventually the data provider, if you can manage that. This is an example of something called like a fully decentralized cryptocurrency derivative. So the way this looks is you have 3 separate data sources, completely independent of each other, feeding into 3 independent Sybil-resistant node operators, which are completely independent of each other, and they're arriving at a certain amount of consensus to provide a price input into a contract. And then this we have working on mainnet right now. If you wanted to go and use a decentralized Oracle network, you could get these 3 exact data sources, and you could have these 3 Sybil-resistant oracles give you the data to your contract for a higher degree of reliability and trust in the input into your contract. And then this Oracle network can expand to 5, 7, 21, 52, however many nodes the user feels they need. So that's another concept we'd be really thrilled to discuss, is what degree of decentralization in a collection of independent node operators is enough to provide a certain level of security. So we think this is another fundamental question of, is it 1,000? Is it 111? Is it 3? Is it 21? How many node operators do we feel independent Sybil-resistant node operators do we feel we fundamentally need? Then Chainlink, our approach, fundamentally what we do is we have deep integrations with data sources and payment sources, because eventually I think the logical thing is that the data source themselves actually runs the Oracle, and so that eliminates a hop. that eliminates another level of risk. So fundamentally, our approach focuses on integrations with all these different inputs and outputs at a deeper level, so that eventually they can be almost natively integrated into each input and output, which once again eliminates a lot of the risk, because maybe you might not even need an additional hop to an oracle. Then you just have to worry about multiple independent sources that run their own nodes inside their own environment. So I think what all of this will lead to is contracts like this, where you can get various types of data for proving that, for example, goods arrived and that they were insured correctly, and that they ended up at their desired destination. And fundamentally, I think that's really the outcome that we're trying to create. And then they obviously need to pay, so that's another key outcome. Now I think what we're going to do in the next part of the talk is I'm going to hand it off to one of my colleagues, Alex Coventry, who does research with us at Chainlink. And he'll describe an approach to making threshold signatures more efficient. And what that means is that now, basically the approach provides a way for there to be Oracle networks made up of thousands of independent node operators, but for their output to be verified on chain at an extremely low cost. So we've taken the cost down from something like, I think it was $3,000 per verification to something like $1.50 or less. So it's orders of magnitude improvement. And I'll hand it over to Alex. And when he's done, I'll come back and talk about TEs and defense in depth.
Grab this, thank you.
How do I operate this? I see. Okay. Hi, everyone. So, I'm going to tell you about threshold signatures. Let me just briefly explain the problem that we're solving. The obvious way to set up a decentralized oracle is to have each of the oracles sending in a report to a smart contract. So that's a separate transaction per oracle.
Can you speak more to the
Oh, sure. I've got a picture here. All right, great. If we can instead arrange an off-chain negotiation protocol between the oracles, and then use a threshold signature on the observation that they all agree to, then we can, then all we have to do on chain is verify this one approval here. So essentially what's going to be happening now is some new data is going to be coming into all of the oracles. They're going to discuss amongst themselves what the consensus observation is. They're going to construct a single signature between themselves, and then they're going to send that signed consensus data to the blockchain. The way we do that is with threshold signatures. So we're going to have n oracles, and then there'll be some threshold number T of oracles which need to participate in order to construct one of these signatures. This is not magic. This is cryptography which has been around since the turn of the century. But if you're looking for a friendlier introduction, this blog post explains it all the math in detail. Essentially what we're doing by doing this T of n signature is we're assuming that at most T minus 1 of the oracle participants are dishonest. And so then because we require T signatures, we know that the value that they're signing has to be honest. The way this works is these n oracles collaborate to construct a public key P, which is the generator on the curve group times X, which is a secret which nobody knows. They all have shares of this secret X, which they can combine to do cryptography with this, but they can't. It would take T of them to actually reconstruct the secret, and we know that we're assuming that only T minus 1 of these participants are dishonest. And so then they use this long-term signature to sign a message. So essentially, they go through the same procedure that they did up here to choose a secret K, which is called the nonce in a signature, and then a public value associated with that, which is just little k times g. Whoops. And then finally, what they share with each other is their bits of the Ks minus a challenge involving the message times their bits of the secret. And then from that, they're able to this signature, which is the secret K minus X times this challenge. And then this public K, the value S that they've reconstructed, is the actual signature. So this formula for the signature, it's linear in K and X, and that's crucial to the reconstruction process. It uses Lagrange interpolation, which is a linear process. So we're really depending on the fact that we can take linear combinations of the Ks and the Xs in order to get the secret K and X. But in this case, we're taking linear combinations of a difference between these, and that's illegible. So you can't actually reconstruct K or X from this. Now, this is a different signature scheme than Ethereum uses. Ethereum uses ECDSA, and the cognate to this S expression that I was just talking about is this for ECDSA. So in this case, it's nonlinear in K. We take the inverse of K, and that means that we can't use threshold signatures in this way. Now, it is possible to do threshold signatures with ECDSA, but the math is way more complex, involves much larger message space sizes. In theory, you could hold people to account in Solidity to make sure they're behaving correctly in this procedure, but it would be hugely expensive. So it would be much nicer if we could do this with Schnorr signatures, and Schnorr signatures, this linear property, gives them a lot of other nice opportunities that we may be able to use. So let's look at what we would have to do in order to verify a Schnorr signature on chain. Essentially what we do is we take the S in the signature and the K in the signature, and we compute this. S times the generator of the group plus this challenge times the public key. And then in secret, if you know what K and X are, that adds up to this, which is just K times G, which is this public K. So there's this sort of magic process where I give you K and S, and you calculate this, which has nothing to do with elliptic curve arithmetic, and you get back K. So we just have to check that the value we got is equal to K. So it comes down, the most expensive part is computing these scalar multiplications of curve points and an elliptic curve addition. So there is already an implementation of this using the pairing curve in Solidity with the precompiled contracts on the alt-BN 128 curve. If you're interested, you can see that implementation here. Go to Harry R. Sol Crypto GitHub repository. It takes about 85,000 gas, sorry. Whoa. What happened here? Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay, so I don't know if any of you saw Vitalik's EC recover trick. He had a post on ETH Research about it. So essentially what you do is if you have a message hash and an elliptic curve point represented like this, and the scalar part of the signature, then when you compute EC recover, essentially what you're doing is you're getting back the Ethereum address of the curve that you get by calculating this arithmetic. Here, Rx is the x ordinate of the point on the curve, and V is the parity of the y ordinate. So we can actually abuse this to compute Schnorr signatures. And how much time have I taken? 5 minutes? Okay, great. Yeah, so we can actually abuse this to compute Schnorr signatures. So what we're going to do is, in the Schnorr signature, we're going to replace this challenge message where we take K and concatenate it with the message and then hash it. And instead, we're going to take the address of K, concatenate that with the hash of the message, and then hash that. And then the signature is going to be this S, the same sort of S as we had before, but with this new challenge value, and then the address of K. So the address of K is just the 160-bit, lower 160 bits of the hash of the point K. And so essentially what we end up doing is if we go back to this slide here, we want to compute this and check that it's equal to K. Now, instead what we do is we're going to compute the address of that using EC recover and then check that that's equal to the address of K. And so it turns out that if you plug this into the formula for EC recover, that should, on the happy path, that gives you exactly the address of K. So this is the check that we need to do now. So this returns a 160-bit hash. If you know anything about cryptography and hashes, you might be worried at this point that I'm opening myself to a birthday attack, which would only take 80 bits because of this 160-bit hash. But who's familiar with the birthday paradox? Okay, so in the birthday paradox, you have a room full of n people, and then you ask what's the probability that some pair in that room has the same birthday. And because there's roughly n squared possible connections, possible pairs, the probability increases. The probability of finding a collision like that increases with the square of the number of people. And so that's how a birthday attack works on a hash. Oh, my slides were cut off. Can I type somewhere? Because I can download my slides.
No, I have the slides.
Okay.
Maybe notepad.
Notepad? Yeah. I don't even have a keyboard here, so.
Oh,
There is a keyboard.
Oh, there's a keyboard. Oh, okay, great. Well, no, that's not what I want.
Yeah, it shows that you have 18 seconds.
Oh yeah. Could you bring up the? Thank you. Thank you. That's great. Oh, damn, it looks like it got cut off there somehow. I will just bring up the, here we go. Control L. Oh, that doesn't work in Internet Explorer. Okay. Here we go. web.edu/Alex.
So yeah, it says that there's only 8 pages.
I must have cut it off, or Google must have cut it off somehow. Okay, great. Sorry about this. I don't know what happened there. Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, so
By the way, you have 1 minute left.
1 minute left. Okay, yeah, so this is essentially just going over what I just described, working out the algebra to show that what you get when you compute that EC recover is the same. So how do I go back on here?
On your keyboard.
Yeah, but it's, there we go, great. Yeah, so the other thing I want to say about this, there's no birthday attack because the things that you're comparing, they both have K on each side. So you can't pair arbitrary hashes to each other. You have to get the one with K in it on this side and then one with K in it on this side. So, so you actually get 160 bits of security from this. And if you're interested in this, this argument is made in more detail in this paper, Hash Function Requirements for Schnorr Signatures. Okay, and
So your time's almost up.
okay, great. So yeah, I have an implementation of this. It works. I've got it down to about 13,000 gas. In theory, I should be able to get it down to a marginal cost of about 7,000 gas per signature. That's it.
Cool.
Thank you. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll be around if anyone has questions.
Yeah, there's a keyword there, but
Great. Thank you. All right. How is everyone doing today?
Great.
Great.
Even
Let's.
better
Yeah, even better now. So I know you guys haven't had your coffee, but let's start with a pop quiz. Who in this room thinks they know what Ethereum is?
Not if you're asking.
Come on, we can do better than that. All right. Well, okay. I'm glad that no one thinks they know what it is because you're probably all right. So, can I like not show that sidebar? I have like some spoilers here. Present. Yeah, perfect. Wow. All right. So this is what Ethereum is in everyone's opinion who uses it, at least as far as I can observe it. Ethereum is like a good friend, and good friends are like stars. You don't always see them, but you know they're always there. And that kind of falls into the Ethereum name of sort of being everywhere. And we see Ethereum as like this wonderful best friend who, when we're cold, they're going to take that blanket off their back and give it to us, make sure we feel all warm and fuzzy and happy about ourselves. And not only that, but Ethereum gets even better. So Ethereum is going to run all of these dApps for us. So while we're sitting there nice and warm with our cardigan, we can also do things like trade financial products and create our own tokens to get rich. But not only that, Ethereum is also going to be our bank. So we're going to replace the entire Federal Reserve and the entire economy with this magical friend we have that just does these things for us, and it all works wonderfully.
So can you shill Ethereum into the mic?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I didn't realize that the live stream was watching. So yes, Ethereum, it's this wonderful friend. It's going to run all our dApps and like power the world and be our bank. And it's all great. Except really, that's not what Ethereum is. So at the application level, we think of Ethereum as this trusted third party where we hand it some code and it's just going to run this code. And whatever we tell it to do is sort of going to happen. And we don't have to worry about how Ethereum does what it does. It just sort of gives us an answer and we can all trust it as this third party that we all share. So that's great. But ETH 2.0 and crypto economics are mostly designed to create this trusted third party. So great. So yay, we're done. Ethereum is great and it solves all the world's problems and we can all go home, right? Yes. But no, because really, this is the truth of what Ethereum looks like. So Ethereum is not your best friend. It's a really complicated pile of chairs. And you don't know why that pile of chairs is sort of arranged like it is. Maybe you don't even need to know. Maybe you just want to hang your jacket on those chairs and it's fine that they look like that, you know? And not only that, but where is this pile of chairs? It's in this part of the map where we're told that there are dragons here and there are all these scary attacks that can happen that'll come knock down our chairs, right? So Ethereum is not this. Ethereum is really this, right? It's this complicated pile of chairs sort of held up by the miners at the base level. So this guy here is going to be our miner, running all of these dApps and all these amazing things that we just trust. So instead of a friend who's putting a cardigan over you, think like this guy who's holding this like really tall tower of blocks that he can barely even lift. Okay, so what do blockchains promise? So blockchains promise a new financial system, a purely peer-to-peer version of electronic cash and financial instruments that will bring integrity to all our institutions, hold banks accountable, and bring fairness to their users, right? And that's what sort of the friend gives you. So let's say you want to do an exchange. Well, before you would have to trust some shady guy on Wall Street. Now you have Ethereum to run your exchange for you. You just run it as a smart contract, and this magical friend of yours will execute the trusted third party where Alice and Bob, or in this case, I guess Alice and Alice, non-gender normative Bob, can trade these tokens, right? So that's the promise of DEXs, and we all know quite a lot about DEXs. I'm not going to overview the basics of DEXs, but the idea is you have someone who wants to make an order and someone who wants to take it, and they do so through a smart contract, where the smart contract makes sure that both sides are settled fairly. So here, Bob is trading 1 BBT, or 1 Bob's Bubble token, for 1 ETH with Alice. And this seems great. It seems like we can achieve the trust that blockchains are designed for. We have assets that can't be stolen by the operator, can't be hacked out of existence. And it's accessible to everyone, so everyone can come use this DEX, and anyone can create their own bubble tokens and sell them to Alice. Not only that, but it's super transparent. We all see all this data on the chain, and we can analyze it and think about, like, is this a fair system, and is this what we want for our users? But is it really fair? And that's sort of what I'm going to talk about in this talk, whether Ethereum is actually doing this sort of trusted third-party job as we think it is, and what that means for both the design of Ethereum itself and for people who build on it. So what really happens here is Alice, when she wants to go place this order to buy one of Bob's Bubble tokens for ETH, ideally Bob would sort of take the other side of that order. But what if Alice wants to cancel the order now, right? She's changed her mind. She's realized Bob's Bubble token is a scam, or she put the wrong price in on her order or something like that. Well, with many DEX designs, she actually has to go to the blockchain to cancel that order. She has to tell the smart contract that she wants to invalidate this and it can no longer be settled. And that's where that sort of inefficient process involving a bunch of chairs stacked on top of each other is going to come in. Because it's actually going to be very hard for Alice to cancel this order on-chain without allowing sort of Bob to take that order. So the case where this goes wrong is where Bob is a bot who's designed to sort of front-run Alice's cancellation. And when she goes to sort of cancel her order on-chain with a certain gas price, this bot will run in front of her and take the order anyway, sort of violating Alice's intent and doing something that we really don't consider fair in most exchanges. And the way they do this is by sort of raising the gas price. So this is starting to show you that the details of how Ethereum itself works affects the fairness guarantees that Alice is going to have in the execution of her trade. And the miner, of course, will prefer this scenario to the one where Alice cancels. He'll mine the bot's orders first, and the cancellation will fail. Sorry about the formatting on this. It was like poorly converted from PowerPoint. But that's the basic idea of front-running. And the intuition is that the bot that's trying to front-run Alice basically bribes the miner by paying this extra fee, and the miner who's acting in their own rational self-interest will, of course, take that bribe to front-run Alice. So the lesson here is that life, as blockchains are, is nasty, brutish, and short. So there are many sources of revenue for these bots. One of them is typos. What if Alice types the wrong price, and a bot taking that order would make it a bunch of money? But that's just one source. There are many, many ways these bots sort of cheat humans. But they don't only cheat humans, they also cheat each other, right? So bots actually compete to see who's going to take these arbitrage profits, who's going to balance these exchanges, who is going to front-run Alice for her typo, or who's going to sort of smooth the prices on these systems. And the way they do this is by just essentially bidding up the gas price to the miners and trying to issue increasing bribes to get the miners to take their orders. And oh yeah, Alice cries in this picture. So that kind of sucks. And we've measured this in real life, so we've gone out and collected quite a lot of data. And this is what the auctions between two bots actually look like. One here in red, one here in green. You can see they bid the gas price up sort of very quickly. So they're issuing usually hundreds of bids in only the 14 seconds in between each Ethereum block. Again, here you see sort of details of the lower level system, like the 15-second block time, kind of affecting the guarantees that are provided dApps in this model. So we said DEXs are transparent, right? It's great. We can see all this sort of action happening and design systems so that these bots are contained and they're doing the right thing. But that's not actually the case today. So in today's Ethereum, most of these bots play these games off-chain, and most of this data never actually gets to the wonderful friend we all call Ethereum. And there's actually a vast amount of what we call this dark data of these bots playing these games that are extremely economically impactful to the guarantees that anyone trading on a DEX on Ethereum today is getting, but that aren't public on the blockchain and that can't easily be inspected by researchers. So we collected this data, we deployed a bunch of infrastructure all over the Ethereum peer-to-peer network, as well as sort of associated display and processing scripts. We spent many tens of thousands of dollars of AWS time and collected around, I think, at over 1 billion observations at this point on sort of the games that these bots were playing. And I'm not going to talk too much about that because I talked about it at the last DevCon and I don't want to bore you guys. But if you go to frontrun.me, you can sort of see a dashboard that shows these markets in this action in real time. All right, so let's talk about what the bots are actually doing. So the bots are engaging in a very unusual game from a game theoretic point of view, one that's seen like very little study in the literature. The game is imperfect information because none of the bots have the full information of what the other bots are playing or what everyone's seeing or what the miners are seeing. It's continuous time because it happens, there's no like discrete intervals here of like the auction starts and the auction ends. It's all going on continuously. It's partial all pay because actually the losing bots here are also paying fees because the losing bots still issued this transaction that's still going to get mined by the miner into the chain. It's just going to cost them money. And it's probabilistic in duration because no one knows when the next block is going to be found. So no one knows when the game is going to end, which affects the way all of these bots play, of course. So this is a very, very complicated game to study. Like traditional game theory barely studies these kinds of games, and certainly nothing as complicated as the DEX games on Ethereum. So we've done a game theoretic analysis of this that you can read in our paper and talked about a few example equilibriums the bots play. Actually, something very interesting goes on in these games where the bots informally collaborate by raising their bids less than they could to basically lower their probability of success while stealing money from the miners, right? So they sort of socialize this extra money among all the bots that are playing by just making losing bids. And that's a very counterintuitive outcome. It's not something you'd expect to see, but it's what we actually see in the data. So our data does validate this model. And you can see the model here. So in these like bids, these raises that we were talking about, these dots are for each auction, what is a bot's typical raise percentage? So how much over their own bid are they paying each time to like get a miner's attention to be included in a blockchain? And what our model predicts is that they should increase the minimum each time, because if they increase more than the minimum, they're sort of putting more money on the table from the miner and taking it away from themselves. And you can see here over time between around June 2018 and now, all of these bots have actually converged to this equilibrium that we've predicted. And they all actually are doing pretty much the 12.5% raise that's enforced by the parity client as the minimum fee to relay transactions across the Ethereum peer-to-peer network. So again, this is like a really arcane technical detail of the parity client that I don't think anyone who was implementing it ever thought would economically determine like the guarantees that DEX users are getting on their trades. So it really shows you that intimate relationship between the applications and layer one that I'm going to be talking about in the rest of the talk. So what you get here are actually Wall Street-like latency wars, because speed here helps. The faster you can issue bids, the more likely you are to be the one who's had the last word when a miner goes to actually pick which transaction is included. And this is very simple to Flash Boys, which is kind of a classic Wall Street narrative of high-frequency trading and how this whole game played out in the 90s in the technologization, I guess, of the financial industry, including things like spending hundreds of millions, now billions and billions of dollars on fiber optic cables, antenna networks, and things like that to get those bids in to communicate those orders just that little bit faster. For example, a $300 million cable to cut latency from 16 to 13 milliseconds between New York and Chicago. And these $300 million expenses are coming from the users that are trading on the platform, right? Their money, their inefficiencies of them trading on the platform is what's paying these people to compete in this economy. And DEX bots are doing the same thing. They're constantly improving their speed over time. So here you can see the average latency in between bids for each of these bots that we've observed sort of coming down over time from about 1 second in June 2018 to often like under 0.4 seconds here, which when you consider that this is a globally distributed peer-to-peer network is actually quite an efficient sort of propagation strategy. Not only that, but you're seeing auctions here that are consisting of more and more bids. So the color of these dots is sort of the number of bids per auction. You can see that in recent auctions, we're having things like 50 plus bids per bot per auction. So each bot that's trying to capture these opportunities is bidding over 50 times to sort of try to get this arbitrage profit. And they're constantly improving and constantly competing against each other. Okay, so how do these trades actually profit the bots? And how is this different from Wall Street? Well, one way is that DEX trades can often be pure revenue. So because we have smart contracts here, a smart contract can execute multiple transactions on multiple DEXs atomically for essentially a guaranteed profit. So I can make a trade on Uniswap and a trade on Bancor and a trade on 0x, and if any of them fail, I can undo everything in my smart contract, and none of the trades will execute. This sort of gives my arbitrage an all or nothing property, as opposed to in Wall Street, where what you see is you try to make like 6 or 7 trades, and some of them will succeed and some of them will fail, and your pricing model is a lot more probabilistic. So this is not all the arbitrage on Ethereum takes this pure revenue form. There's actually a lot of this classic probabilistic stuff going on too, but because it's so easy to measure the profit from this, we're going to focus on this for our work, just because you have this like one number that's sort of unambiguously the profit, which you can't see in this probabilistic sort of arbitrage. So we measured the size of this opportunity. It's around the size of this market. It's around, I think, $6 to $10 million total US since the DEXs have launched, that these bots have profited, using very conservative estimates. So I'd expect the real number to be probably more than 100 times higher than that. And if you're interested in why the estimates are conservative, we can discuss that offline. So of course, you have these more complicated arbitrage opportunities too, with like 3-leg trades or 4-leg trades, or weird exchanges like Bancor where everything goes to their token for no reason and things like that. So arbitrages are very good at optimizing this. All right, so why does this matter? Why would I care about this DEX story? Like, I'm not trading on a DEX. I'm here implementing a dApp or working on a sharding spec. Well, the reason is that these pure revenue opportunities for bots lead to these gas auctions that we've talked about. And that's one type of what we call ordering optimization fees, which is one type of miner extractable value. So ordering optimization fees are fees that are implicit in the system, sort of that come from the order in which you process transactions, right? So miners get paid some fee to mine transactions, but they also have some value in sort of controlling the order of transactions. They could insert their own transactions, they could take bribes to reorder these however they want for arbitragers or whatever that might be. So miners really have a lot of freedom here to extract value from this system. And this is the tip of the tip of the tip of the iceberg. Front running and MEV is everywhere in cryptocurrencies. Bug bounties, CryptoKitties breeding, etc., even potentially centralized exchanges. But wait, there's more. So high-frequency trading on Wall Street is like well known to be a systemic sort of issue to the market. We've seen flash crashes and things like that from high-frequency trading. And these similar things on Ethereum actually pose the same risk to the underlying blockchains that we're running. So in the Flash Boys paper, we talk about one thing called time-banded attacks. And these are sort of classic 51% attacks. So think of these ordering fees, these miner values from these DEXs, as these coins sort of in each block, where if a miner mines that block, they control that interval. They can insert their own transactions and arbitrage people and sort of profit some amount, right? And what these coins actually end up doing, these coins are also not only sourced from this ability of miners to insert transactions, they can also be sourced from these fees that the bots are paying. So the crazy amounts of gas that these bots are burning also sort of provides more coins for the miners from the DEX market. And they're all stealable by miners, right? So what a miner could end up doing is sort of identifying the size of these opportunities on chain and rewinding the blockchain so that they take all of that money instead of the original miners. And using this sort of value that's present from the layer 2 applications, they can subsidize 51% attacks, selfish mining, and other sorts of protocol deviations. Right, and this could destabilize the whole blockchain, right? So like if a new block comes in that has 100 million of arbitrage opportunities, it could take a while for the miners to fight each other and figure out who's actually going to get to profit from that 100 million of opportunities. And that's actually a risk in Ethereum today. So we have $1.5 billion of DEX volume at the peak DEX volume month of July 2018. And the cost, at least in theory, if you have perfect access to hardware, to mount a 51% attack on Ethereum for a month is around $56 million. So you already have way more value being exchanged on these DEXs than security in the protocol. And here we've shown sort of the worst offenders, certain blocks where these blue bars, which are the fees that the miner is earning only from these arbitrage bots, way exceed the transaction fees, which are shown here in red, or the block rewards, which are shown here in brown, often by orders of magnitude. So for blocks like this, like it's certainly profitable as the next miner to pretend to ignore this block and sort of try to claim these fees for yourself, even if you only have a small probability of succeeding, because the payout is just so huge. And this, again, destabilizes the whole network in ways that are sort of known and modeled by other papers. So we don't know the exact subsidy that MEV provides miners today, but we do know that this is a super, super, super conservative estimate, and it's already enough to suggest that some attacks at some points in time are already feasible today. So we have some counterintuitive lessons that I want you guys to take away from this talk, which is that blockchain abstraction layers can fail. Ethereum is not the friend with the cardigan, it's the pile of chairs. And you should try to understand like where in that pile of chairs the structure is and why building your app on top of this pile of chairs makes sense in your case. It is true that proof of stake kind of throws a wrench into this. If you're interested in the details of that, I'm happy to discuss proof of stake and sharding implications offline. But it is still an issue for proof of stake. All right, so let's hear it again. Blockchain abstraction layers can fail and there's a risk today. And let's hear it again. Great. Everyone repeat after me. Blockchain abstraction layers can fail. There is a risk today. Perfect. Thank you. Don't forget it. So when we do things like this, like use Uniswap to build oracles, right? Uniswap being a manipulable sort of market mechanism that miners have full control over, that they can extract value from directly, and we're using that as sort of price feeds in higher level financial instruments. Like, to me, this just makes absolutely no sense, and I would love to talk to people who think that this is, anything like this is remotely a good idea, and we can sit down for like an hour and talk about it. But please stop. That's all I'm going to say about that. So MEV is everywhere in DeFi. It's not just DEX arbitrage. It's also bots bidding for gas. It comes from manipulating oracles for financial instruments, as the previous talks have highlighted. It comes from selecting in DeFi systems, for example, who gets liquidated and who doesn't. It comes from controlling the winners of Ponzi schemes and gambling games and rewriting even winners in the past. It comes from rewriting who gets to buy into ICOs that would have been profitable. So there's many sources of MEV, and please think about them when you build your application, because they do threaten blockchain consensus, as we've sort of described. So I think we've pretty well shown that this is what Ethereum actually looks like. And let's zoom in on this guy. This is our trustworthy miner over here, right? So what are we going to do to this guy? We're going to take a little gasoline and we're going to sort of just pour it on him and like set the whole thing on fire, right? And this is sort of what sharding is going to do as it lowers the rewards. And we'll talk about that in a second. But you might say, Phil, can't we trust the miners to do the right thing? Aren't they all honest? Don't they have incentives to hold ETH, blah, blah, blah? So for that, I suggest you take a look at the DarkDAO blog post. I don't really have time to get into it, but what the DarkDAO is it's like a trusted hardware-based secret cartel that implements perfectly efficient like bribery, private smart contracts, and coordination mechanisms to basically secretly bribe any users in the system to take any sort of strategy space or any coordination that an attacker would want. And it can do that undetectably. And you can do that through SGX technologies. You can do it through MPC. And so, as we've said before, we can expect the pants to be bribed off sort of all these people. All right, so getting to the end here, and I want to leave you with some takeaways. So if you're a layer 2 designer, I want you to keep in mind that layer 2 also furnishes this MEV, and think carefully about where that is in the system. So for example, watchtowers in your payment channels, fraud proofs, also lead to these priority gas auctions. If anyone can claim your fraud proofs, these bots will fight for the profit. Also, layer 2 often assumes availability and capacity of the main chain to settle, which is not true under bribery. So just think about that abstraction carefully, and remember, abstractions can fail, and already there are signs that they might fail today. And layer 2 provides incentive to attack layer 1. All right, for dApp devs, oracles and their uses in DeFi also provide MEV, as we've said pretty clearly in the past presentation. Also think about like what is the value of manipulating your system, and what are the real protections? What are the real economic protections you're getting there, including with regards to things like 51% attacks, censorship, and manipulation of ordering. I have not seen a good analysis of, for example, what would happen to MakerDAO if there were a prolonged 51% or censorship attack on ETH. And to me, like having a $100 million system where you haven't done that basic level of due diligence is like, it's shocking. So please stop doing that. As we've seen, dApp devs are really blasé about these risks that they could pose to L1. For example, Uniswap, they deployed without a second thought, but it actually does threaten the stability of the chain, economically speaking, at the volume it's sort of reached today. All right, lastly, for sharding and spec designers, consider the MEV in your protocol analyses, and think about things like sharding without load balancing, right? So if you have shards where a sharding system where certain shards are more valuable than others, or certain shards have more value to extract from them than others, your entire security model sort of breaks down because you're making all these assumptions about your shards being homogeneous in security, but they're really like heterogeneous in attack reward, and different sort of sets of strategies become profitable. And it's key to provide sufficient rewards and penalties. So we all want low inflation, but you can't be running $1 billion DEX on a system that has like 500,000 of validator rewards a month or something. It just doesn't work. So that does matter. All right, if you want to learn more, read our paper, and it's on Google, Flash Boys 2.0. It goes very, very deep, probably more deeper than you'd ever want to know into this stuff. And also read our article on the Dark DAO, and stay tuned for some new papers we're publishing soon about countermeasures for the Dark DAO. These are all my amazing coworkers. None of this would be possible without their extremely hard work over a period of several years, so thank you to all of them. And if you want to learn more about us, go to initc3.org, and this is my final disclaimer slide. Thanks. And yeah, I'll be around if you want to talk about this.
Is it time for a break?
Yeah, we have 15-minute break now.
There's coffee outside.
Oh my god. Is Phil a god or is Phil a god?
You like it? Pretty great. I do want to spend an hour talking to you about unicorns. Great. Yeah. I knew you'd be.
Hello.
So I'm speaking after James. Would it be possible to plug in my laptop for my talk?
company called Summa, and a lot of people have taken to calling me that atomic swaps guy. I've done a lot of work on atomic swaps and decided that they're frankly kind of terrible. I mean, we'll go into this in a second. The structure here is kind of loose. I just got off a red eye and I didn't have a lot of time to prepare for this, unfortunately. So I'm mostly rehashing a talk I gave at MIT for the first 10 to 15 minutes, and then we're going to go into a little less structured. So atomic swaps are kind of terrible. So this is the standard like Tier-Nolan atomic swap. It's based on hash commitment and revelation of the preimage. It has 5 steps. We negotiate an agreement, like I'm going to trade my Bitcoin for your Ether. We're going to use these public keys. This is the hash digest that we're committing to. And then first I escrow, then you escrow, and then I settle, and then you settle. So 4 on-chain transactions plus a negotiation period at the start, right? So this is what's gonna, all right. Oh, and it's important to talk about how long this protocol takes. When we make an on-chain transaction, we need to wait for some sort of finality, whether that's an objective or a protocol finality like proof-of-stake systems provide, or whether it's subjective proof-of-work finality. We need to set in proof-of-work some security parameter that we're comfortable with that means a transaction won't be rolled back. The atomic swap takes 2 finality periods, what I like to call confirmation cycles, for everybody involved. So when I escrow, you have to wait a confirmation cycle before you escrow. And after you've escrowed, I have to wait a confirmation cycle before I settle. And so for basically everybody involved, there's going to be this 2 confirmation cycle waiting period after we start the protocol, right? And so this is like generally what happens with an atomic swap in practice, right? You have a negotiation phase and then everybody backs out because why would you do that? Atomic swaps are terrible. So the next most common situation is I escrow and you just bail. The protocol accounts for this. I don't lose my funds, but they are locked up for more than 2 confirmation cycles, potentially as many as like 5 or 6, depending on how we parameterize this, and it's terrible. You lose nothing, and I lose access to my money for several hours, or days, depending on what chain we're on. After I've escrowed and you've escrowed, if you choose to do that, I have what's called the free option. So I decide when this trade happens and whether it happens and what it does. So maybe I'll just delay settlement as long as possible to see if the exchange rate moves in my favor. There's no penalty for me doing this. It's actually worth money to me. So I'll do this all the time, no matter what. And then it's important to remember that like time on blockchains is a little wibbly wobbly. We don't actually have good clocks to deal with. And so we can set up scenarios where I can steal your money by manipulating on-chain timers, especially if I'm a miner or if we're on a chain with like a very low hash rate. It's really easy to manipulate. And so the failure case here is that you lose all your money. Sorry. So we can do better with blockchains. Blockchains. All right. So I think we're all fairly familiar with what a blockchain is. We have hash linked. We do this with proof of work most of the time. So this is actually Satoshi's diagram, and he got all the arrows backwards. They need to go the other direction, so we're going to fix that for him. So your blocks commit to transactions and past blocks. We calculate the state based on the chain history. The arrows are commitments, like this block commits to the previous block, commits to the block before that, commits to the transactions in it. You can nicely see this going back. All right, so the chain is the history makes the state. We reach the current state by applying the history. Bitcoin uses the UTXO model, Ethereum uses accounts, it's kind of a thing. In proof of work, we tend to follow the heaviest valid chain, and the word valid's doing an awful lot of work there that we're going to get into in a second. But, if you have a blockchain, it's got some uncles, Like, you follow the heaviest valid chain. You can see this one. We drop out these blocks because they're not in the heaviest valid chain. This guy does nothing. It's not a real block anymore. Ethereum, you kind of reference these and reward them. In Bitcoin, you don't. To Phil's point earlier, like, referencing uncles actually, it gives miners less of an incentive to extend the honest chain because they'll still get paid for extending a dishonest chain, or for going back and attempting to reorg the honest chain. So right now, the uncle reward is like, I want to say 7/8 of the block reward in Ethereum, and that's really not a good situation to be in. Ethereum's monetary policy is all like arbitrary and randomly decided most of the time. Okay, so we follow the heaviest chain to resolve conflicts, right? So if Alice is trying to double spend and pay Charlie and Bob at the same time, well, we follow the heaviest valid chain. It's not valid to have both of those in there, so we just go with Alice paid Bob and Charlie didn't get paid at all. We don't admit obviously stupid things into the chain, like the flat earth over here. That's just a bad idea. It's invalid. We don't do that. Okay, so me as a user, I don't know if you've ever run a geth or parity node, but it crashes my laptop all the time. I don't want other people's transactions or other people's state that much, so I tend to use SPV. This is awfully difficult in Ethereum and fairly difficult in Bitcoin. Sorry, this is an investor joke. We can move on from there. SPV stands for Simple Payment Verification. Instead of syncing the entire chain with all the history and applying all the transactions, I sync only the headers of the chain. I get the work. I don't look at the validity. So I can still follow the heaviest, but I don't know if somewhere in there there's something invalid, right? So SPV, you're getting reduced security. You know that you're on the heaviest, best chain that you've heard of so far, but you don't know whether the history of that chain is good. Generally speaking, this is probably okay. I know most of us use infra all the time, and this is strictly better than infra. So, like, the trade-off of SPV is we assume miners are checking validity for us. So we're dropping the transactions, we're dropping all the state, we're just checking the work, we're following the heaviest chain, everything's great. All of this works completely differently in proof of stake, so just, well, yeah. So what does this have to do with swaps anyway? Because I started off talking about swaps, and this is supposed to be like the Oracle and DEX day, I think, right? Yeah? Okay. It is it Wednesday? I don't know. Okay. So a few years back, someone created this awfully nice smart contract called BTC Relay. And BTC Relay works kind of like this. You've got Ethereum, and it's referencing Bitcoin's chain. So we're just keeping nice references and history of Bitcoin within an Ethereum contract. So we can just, over time, track Bitcoin's chain tip. The problem is relays are expensive. You see all these block updates we had to do? Each of those you have to store on chain. It costs like 20,000 gas, and then you have to store a bunch of information about it, and it's 20K gas per slot, and it really is a bit of a headache. And unfortunately, like, BTC Relay's been dead for about 18 months because nobody updates the chain because nobody wants to read that. Nobody actually ever used it. So we can do better than relays, too, with blockchains. And I think that's the last time I used that joke in these slides. So get your laughs in now. Okay, so blockchain clients follow the heaviest valid chain in proof of work. BTC Relay is trying to follow Bitcoin's heaviest header chain without syncing the entire history because that would be really, really expensive in Ethereum. Okay, so the thing is, BTC Relay wastes money, like a lot of money all the time. When we want to look at Bitcoin's history, we have a specific objective there. We're trying to inspect a specific event as the user. Like, I want the smart contract to check whether I got paid. And we don't actually need the history to do that because we can't check the history's validity anyway. So anything before that payment, we don't need. I don't care about it. And I need some stuff after that payment, but I don't need everything. Like, why should I keep like both of these conflict sets of headers, right? So instead of doing a relay where you update a lot over time, what we actually need is just like a transaction and some headers. We can't check the entire history's validity, like literally can't on chain. We get no benefit from checking history past this point. All we really need is like a stateless slice of headers. Okay, so this is what we call stateless SPV. Instead of a relay, it's just like a chunk of headers out of the middle of the chain with nothing before it and nothing after it. Okay. I forgot about that joke. Sorry. So stateless SPV, the security you're getting from it is that somebody put a whole lot of work into that header chain. If you see 4 Bitcoin headers, you know that somebody probably spent like close to $250,000 making those 4 headers. You can check that using the headers themselves and very little outside information. If you see 5, you know, that's 25% more. If you see 6, that's 20% more security than 5. So the stateless SPV, you have adjustable security. If you want to be more secure, you just look at more headers in a single chunk. We can measure the quality of headers using their difficulty. This is an in-protocol feature. We check it using SHA-2. Don't worry about how it works too much because it's kind of a pain. And again, it's worse to check in Ethereum because the difficulty adjustment is more complex. Okay, so we can give each header its own quality score. We can check the consistency of the chain, that they all reference the previous header, and we can sum the qualities of the headers in the chain to get a quality for the proof. So this is our security parameter. You want more security, get more difficulty from your header slice. Okay, so it's not about how many headers there are. A common misconception is that we need 6 Bitcoin headers to be secure, or what is it, like 240 Ethereum headers for equivalent work. The actual thing is you're not looking for the number of headers, you're looking for the amount of money that was sunk into producing them. And so you can have shorter proofs with better quality, or you can have longer proofs with worse quality. It's all about the difficulty of the headers. Okay, so difficulty implies money spent. This is why we call it proof of work. You can't make good headers without spending a lot of money and owning a mountain of ASICs. So this means that if you see 5 headers with good difficulty, it means somebody spent an awful lot of money to create them. And from that, we can assume that they're part of the main chain with a certain probability. Okay, so real proofs get made for you, the user, by miners all the time. If I am a normal Bitcoin user, the miners are generating headers for me at 1 every 10 minutes, give or take. If I'm trying to fake it, I have to spend an equivalent amount of real money to fake it. And so honest users of SPV proofs have an advantage over dishonest users. Fake proofs cost a lot of time. If I have 10% of Bitcoin's hash rate, it takes me 100 minutes per header to generate, block headers. So again, honest users get a header every 10 minutes for free, free-ish. Dishonest users get a header every 100 minutes for a lot of money, really a lot of money. Okay. So the trade-off here is that SPV has economic security, right? We're basing our beliefs about the chain history on just the amount of money we know is put into creating it. We don't know the validity, we just know how much money someone sunk into generating chain of headers. So if it costs $250K to make this chain of headers, I'm probably pretty safe to transact $100,000. Nobody's going to spend 2.5x just to mess with my transaction. It's not profitable to do so. Okay, so, and again, everything only has economic security. Blockchains only have economic security, and Phil's whole talk was about how on-chain economics can affect the economic security of the underlying chain. So at the very worst, we're about equivalent with existing wallets assumptions here. Okay, so back to swaps, because this is where we started off. Swaps. So when we see an SPV proof, it's essentially answering the question of whether an event occurred on the remote chain. I've been talking about Bitcoin a lot, but these are generalizable to Ethereum or any proof of work chain. It's much more difficult to do things like this with proof of stake, but we'll get back to that later. So we're kind of answering this question of, did this event occur? Or did an event meeting these characteristics occur? So we can ask, did Alice pay Bob? We can ask, did somebody pay Bob? We can ask, did somebody pay Bob with a transaction with a lock time of 10 and an input of, FF? Okay, so we can ask a lot of questions about what happened in the remote chain's history, okay? And for Bitcoin specifically, you guys made an awful mistake and you gave me access to SHA-2. I mean, like, using Kekak was also a pretty big mistake, but so in Solidity, you can actually implement the vast majority of Bitcoin's consensus process just because, SHA-2 exists and is fairly cheap. So this is parsing headers and extracting the difficulty from them. This is, what do we got? This is awfully hard for me to read. This is parsing an entire header. We have a great just library that's stateless pure functions for evaluating Bitcoin data structures in Solidity. And we used it to build stateless swaps. Okay, so remember the Tier-Nolan swap, you have 5 steps, a negotiation and 4 transactions. Here you have 3 steps, no negotiation and 3 transactions. This is, however, an asymmetric protocol. With Tier-Nolan, either chain can go first. With stateless swaps, only the smart contract chain can go first. There's actually a bunch of interesting implementation details that go into this, and as of today, it's basically only possible to do this with Bitcoin because Bitcoin's consensus process is so cheap to verify compared to any other chain. You can't do this with Zcash because it would require 2 to the 9th Blake evaluations, and each Blake per equihash. Each Blake evaluation costs 500,000 gas. And so to get decent security, you're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 million gas. But with Bitcoin, it costs like 700,000 gas, and you get pretty darn good security. So the first kind of step in the stateless swap is I'm going to make an Ethereum smart contract that escrows my Ether. This includes a one-time payment invoice in Bitcoin. So I'm telling this contract, here is 1 Ether. I'd like to get paid 0.01 Bitcoin for it. I'm not actually sure what the exchange rate is. Is that reasonable these days? Okay, so you're telling the smart contract, here's my Ether. I expect to get paid this much Bitcoin, and anyone who does that can have my Ether. Okay. The second step is that anybody can come in and fill your Bitcoin invoice. It's relatively easy to do. It's just like a specially constructed transaction in Bitcoin, and it includes the buyer's Ethereum address in it. And then once that has confirmed, they come back and give a stateless SPV proof to the contract, which validates that I got paid and disperses my Ether to the buyer. So it's, as opposed to the Tier-Nolan swap, there's a lot of advantages. The downsides are that it costs a lot more gas. Tier-Nolan swaps are cheap because it's one SHA-2 evaluation. That's like 120 gas. And as I mentioned earlier, right now you can only do this with Bitcoin unless you want to get into complex zero-knowledge proof evaluation, which I don't have the time to explore right now. All right. I don't actually think that's a trade-off because evidence indicates that basically nobody wants any asset except Ether and Bitcoin. I mean, like, I'm sorry, I'm just calling it like I see it. You can go check the prices. This is kind of a benefit, like we're getting the most popular asset in the ecosystem. Okay, so I have a 5-minute warning, so I need to go faster here. So the benefit over the Tier-Nolan swap is that there's an open market. There's no negotiation phase. Anyone can fill the order as opposed to just a single person. All right, so we have an open market. Anyone can fill the orders. I just said those things. There's no trolls, no free options. You can't back out of this you can't back out of this once you've entered into the contract. Oh yeah, not pictured free options and liquidity trolls because they don't exist. It's twice as fast for each participant as the Tier-Nolan swap. So each of us waits only a single confirmation cycle to subjective settlement, which is pretty darn cool. And I, as the seller, get Bitcoin in my wallet at mempool speed. So I wait for Bitcoin to be filled, which takes about 1 confirmation cycle because you're waiting for my Ether transaction to be confirmed. You wait about 1 confirmation cycle for the Ether because you have to wait for that stateless SPV proof. Okay, and it's safer than the Tier-Nolan swap. We use some really cool Bitcoin tricks to pull this off. Oh, and it's been mainnet since November, but nobody uses it because there's no good UI because you have to build a whole custom wallet, which is a real pain, let me tell you. So you can actually go in and see mainnet. This here is, what is this? This is a Bitcoin transaction. It has 2 inputs and 3 outputs. You can actually learn to read this. It's really painful. Here's a header chain. If you look in here, there's big blobs of zeros in various locations. Those are the commitments to previous headers hashes. That's the work. Okay, so stateless swaps are better than atomic swaps. That's all I'm trying to say here. So don't atomic swap. What I want to spend my last few minutes on, we're going to skip questions because I don't think it would work well with the live stream. What I want to spend the last few minutes on is going back to BTC Relay for a second. I want to talk, before I do that, when I say they're safer, we're actually doing some really cool Bitcoin stuff where orders are matched by miners. And so getting back to Phil's talk, we're actually creating a small amount of MEV in Bitcoin by doing this. Whatever the spread is between the order price and the fair market price. We expect in the long run that the interesting thing here is that this is unlikely to disrupt Bitcoin operation because we can use the standard TX fee sniping tools that Bitcoin has, like relative time locks. And the worst thing the miners can do to the seller is fill their order at their requested price. So we are creating like a small amount of MEV, but it's not significant and it's not likely to affect the consensus process on either chain. All right, so going back to BTC Relay, it's pretty far back here. Okay, so BTC Relay is actually a really cool design. It would be really nice if we had ongoing access to the state of remote chains. For example, remote shards in a sharded consensus system. BTC Relay is essentially the same problem as cross-shard interoperability. One of the things we've been working on that I don't have slides for yet is various kinds of new relays. So we sort these into the proof of work relays and the proof of stake relays. 1 minute, thank you. Proof of work relays, you don't necessarily have to relay every block. We have a working prototype that relays every 2016th block of Bitcoin because that's when the difficulty adjusts. And you can use that to inform stateless or relay proofs in the future. It's objectively useful with, 0.5% of the cost. We can also, if the remote chain supports it, use things like Fly Client. That puts a block history commitment into each block header. The advantage of Fly Client is that you could leave BTC Relay paused indefinitely and have a basically constant cost to update it any amount of headers into the future. So you're going to have a small overhead over a single update, but you're going to update any number of headers at once. And so using Fly Client on chain is actually super attractive. And I like to call myself an engineer rather than a researcher. And in this case, I'm being a social engineer because I'm pushing the EIPs for Blake 2 precompiles, as well as the zip for Fly Client header commitments in Zcash. Because if we can get both of those things, we can implement a strictly better relay between Ethereum and Zcash. But that's going to take a bit of time. And last thing, it's also possible to relay proof of stake. It's just much more complicated. And one of the cool potential for cross-shard interoperability is relays of remote shards using the consensus look-ahead to get future remote consensus sets. All right.
So it's duplicated. Duplicated is good. Okay, thanks very much for having me here. I'm Eli Ben-Sasson. I'm a co-founder and chief scientist at StarkWare. Yeah, so I said, my name is Eli Ben-Sasson. I'm a co-founder, chief scientist at StarkWare. A little bit about us, and then we'll dive in. So currently we're 25, team of 25. Most of us are engineers. We raised $40 million of funding, including a sizable grant from the Ethereum Foundation, and no ICOs. We're not, launching our own coin. The very first project we took on ourselves was this Ethereum Foundation funded project of suggesting both a Stark-friendly hash function and then also implementing it, prover and verifier in code, which is supposed to be delivered a little bit in a little more than a year from now. Today I'll be talking mostly about the alpha of our StarkDEX that we announced yesterday or 2 days ago. It was in transit. I'll also take this opportunity to tell you about the StarkWare session that's going to take place September 15th, 16th this year in Tel Aviv. I know Vitalik's going to be attending and a whole lot of others also from Ethereum. Please sign up or register. So a little bit about Starks, and I gave already numerous talks about this particular topic, so I won't go into details, but just the TLDR of it. Stark is a kind or a family of zero-knowledge proof systems. The main things about them are their scalability potential. So you get a proof that is exponentially smaller than the amount of computation being proved. And also there's an exponentially smaller verification running time than the amount of computation being asserted. And we'll see this very clearly in the StarkDEX alpha. There's a nearly linear prover running time, which means that generating proofs isn't that bad. And it's a universal system, so you can apply it to any computation. And two other bonuses is, first of all, it has no toxic waste, no trusted setup, nothing in the way of, the underlying security doesn't rely on any number of theoretic assumptions. It's plausibly post-quantum secure, and because of that, it also is relatively pretty efficient to use. And now the main message I want to talk to you about is our alpha that we posted information about it just yesterday. I just want to show you the live system now. So in probably in 1 minute, we can actually watch this. We will just go over 1 million transactions, 1 million trades that have been verified. This is a pretty good timing. So we started running the service a little more than 2 weeks ago. It's running on ROPS 10. And once we reach a batch here of 1,024, things are going to start churning, and we should just go over 10 million trades that have been settled on this system. This is, monopoly money, so it's on ROPS 10. It's not the real thing. The average gas per single proof is around 6.2 million gas, but it covers. So there it goes down, but and I think in a few seconds we'll see. Oh wait, it's only going to be 99. Damn, I'm very bad with numbers. Okay, we won't have time to watch it go over 10 million, but I'm sure, okay. We watched it go over 99, whatever it is, 9.9 million. It's a big number. Okay. I think in every talk it happens to me that I try to compute some number online and, it ends like this. Anyways, so there's, I should mention this is a joint project that we've been collaborating with 0x for the past 7 months. And it gives a 20x reduction in the, 20x improvement on the amount of trades that you can put through the system. And it is 95% more efficient in terms of gas cost. Let me go back to presenting. Another thing about it is that you can actually go and see the verifier code. We posted it like today. And so it's under the Apache version 2 license, so open source. And, you can learn a little bit more about it. For instance, here's the first, I think it's the first Solidity implementation of a Fry verifier, pretty efficient one. And downward below, we have some other things. Another thing, I don't do computations with numbers very well, and I also don't code very well, which is even an understatement. So I'm not going to try to explain the code, but our excellent engineers wrote it, and we'll be also over the next few weeks we'll be showing a lot of information about specifications and how the system works, because just the code itself doesn't say much. Okay, so a little bit about some stats. So an individual trade costs about 6K. If you would try to do decentralized exchange trades today on the chain, it would cost around 150 to 200K gas, so it's a significant reduction. It only utilizes around 15% of the Ethereum network currently. We're sustaining a rate of 10 TPS, 10 trades per second, and we're using live stream of data sampled from live trades of Binance feed. As we said, we're already nearing 10 million trades. It's operating seamlessly over time. There's a 10 minutes latency between the time a trade is posted till a batch is finalized, and then the proof is generated. Okay, so it takes, so every 100 seconds or so, if we want to reach a rate of 10 TPS, this is, I think, I get the numbers right here. If you want if you have a batch of 1,000 trades and you want a TPS rate of 10 trades per second, you need to submit a proof every 100 seconds, which is what we do. We're using multiple servers. They're running off-chain, of course. Now, one settlement opens up to, there are 2 users involved in the trade, and they're trading 2 assets, and each asset involves 2 Merkle paths. And currently in this alpha, we're using a Merkle tree of depth 32. So the numbers here, again, we pre-computed them, is 2 to the 18 Petersons in a single hash, and there's a little bit more. There's some ECDSA signatures, so around 250,000 Petersons in one proof. We already proved larger batches. Already talked a few months ago about proving an 8,000 size batch, which is, I think, 2 to the 21 Petersons. But in this demo, we're using a consistent rate of 10 TPS with these things. Now, the functionality that the alpha right now supports is that you can deposit, you can withdraw, and the only orders that currently are supported there are the maker taker. So someone says, I want to trade Apple coin for Orange coin at this rate, and then someone else sees it, takes it. There's full fulfillment. We don't support currently partial orders, but there are multiple assets in there, and you can play and see it in the demo. Here's a system overview, and I'll dive a little bit more into details. You have the end users that are going to come one day. Right now, it's all simulated from this Binance feed. This goes into the exchange or relayer. Currently, this is supported by a simulator that was written by 0x. And there's a whole trading system. So we envision the users, interfacing through some standard exchange, DEX or a centralized exchange could be also. And now what happens is that once in a while, there's a batch of, settlements are, shuttled along to the StarkDEX service. And notice that there is an off-chain part where most of the action is taking place, and only the tip of the iceberg is what's shown on-chain. So the StarkDEX services maintains all the account balances and gets these settlements, updates everything, and then goes to the Stark prover to generate a proof. The proof is sent to the chain, and now on-chain, the Stark verifier verifies the chain. If everything's correct, it updates the state, the current state, which is the Merkle root of this. So this Merkle root will be updated to the latest Merkle root up here. And there is a little bit more information that is kept on-chain for the purposes of deposit, withdrawals, and also for knowing, what are the users and what are the tokens being traded. And all of this interacts with the on-chain ERC20 tokens. So this is roughly what the system looks like. And we'll dive a little bit more into detail on the flows of information in the system. Now, this is just an alpha. Our main goal is to reach, live users, live use cases, work with, all relevant teams that want to offer exchanges, both in the decentralized and the centralized context. So I think or I'll tell you that Brian Armstrong announced on stage at Consensus that they are working with us on offering non-custodial trading through their Coinbase clients, and we are in discussions with multiple decentralized and centralized exchanges. Our mission, after all, is to bring Starks to all corners of the decentralized blockchain universe that we can. So maybe Bitcoin will take a little bit longer because they're a little bit there's not much support for Stark verifiers on them right now, but certainly Ethereum is a very welcoming environment. So our plans for the future in terms of the functionality of the product, if you will, is of course adding additional order types, dealing with them, allowing partial fills, allowing things like time limits. There's also an escape hatch for a catastrophic event. What happens if all computers that are off-chain just explode and there's no one to talk to? What do you do then? How do the users extract their funds? There are mechanisms for that. And of course, adding privacy. Starks can also be turned into zero-knowledge Starks, which requires a significant overhaul of the system. We'll be definitely looking into that as well. Now, this is all in terms of the product, in terms of the science and technology. We're also exploring things that will improve, reduce gas costs further. For instance, using the chain interactively. Starks don't have to be non-interactive; they can be used interactively. And then you can get a lot of security benefits from using the chain. That's one aspect that will reduce the proof size and increase security. The other one is, and this ties in with the Ethereum Foundation effort, will be exploring introducing Stark-friendly hash functions, including into these kind of products, and along the way also working with smaller fields, extension fields, maybe binary fields that will make the prover run faster. Okay, so these are future directions. How am I standing in terms of time? How much time do I have? 5 minutes. Okay. So we already said this is how scalability plays out as you increase batch size. The larger the batch, you can see in the blue line, you can see that the proof size is going up a little bit, the gas cost, but the amortized gas cost per trade is going down significantly. So at the 8,000 batch size, we're already with gas of less than 1,000 per trade, and currently we're standing closer to here. 6,000 or so. So, before I go into the tech dive, I would like just briefly to talk a little bit about EIP 2028, and then maybe in the, just one second. I'll be sharing all these slides. So a little bit about EIP 2028. We co-wrote with Alexei Akunov this thing that suggests to reduce call data gas cost from its current thing of 68 gas per byte to something smaller. And we'd like to reduce it. And this raises two good questions. The first one is, why would you want to reduce it? And that's easy to answer. Second is, by how much? And that's a little harder to answer, but we'll get to it. So why it improves scale? First of all, if 68 is too large a number, you want to bring it down. This just improves overall scalability. If, you can put more in a block. But it's also very important for proof systems like Stark, Snarks, for bulletproofs and other things, Sonic and whatnot. It's also very important for fraud proofs that involve Merkle paths. And all these applications that require data availability could benefit if you can put data on-chain for catastrophic events, for instance, if the off-chain stuff just doesn't appear anymore. It's also very important for stateless clients, and Alexei Akunov is pushing this forward, so I won't talk about it. Now, what is the right cost of all data? We don't know yet, but you could ask, why don't you want to reduce it to 0? And the reason is that if you lower it too much, the blocks will get larger and larger, and they'll take more time to propagate along the network. And then, the network will become a little bit more fragmented. Different miners will know less what the current state is, and then there's less security, and mounting attacks becomes easier. So you can't have it go down to 0. But we need to understand, as you reduce the call data gas cost, you need to understand what will this do to processing time and delay. And fortunately, there's a very nice model for analyzing this that was suggested by Sompolinsky and Zor, and also by Pas-Simen and Shelat, 3 or 4 years ago. The main parameters are the growth rate. For Ethereum, it's like 1 per 10 seconds. There's also the block creation rate that counts not just the blocks on the main chain, but also the uncles. And there's the network delay, the time that elapses between generation of a block till all miners know about it. And there's this efficiency parameter, which is the ratio between beta and lambda. I don't want to go into any math right now. But what we'll be doing is measuring the effect of reducing the gas cost and increasing the size of blocks on the delay, which is the main parameter here, and on the uncle rate. And we'll be measuring it in 3 different ways. We'll take standalone parity or Geth nodes and look what happens to the time of processing and a block as a function of increasing the block size. Then we'll go to small simulated networks that we'll sort of whip up and see what happens. And then finally, we'll try loading for short periods of time, because it costs a lot, the Ethereum network with larger and larger block sizes, and see what the effect of that is on things like uncle rate. And we hope to come up with an answer pretty soon. And of course, I'm saying this because there are a lot of experts here. If you have any other, security considerations that you think we should look at, if you can help us in any which way in measuring these things, I'd love to discuss this. So I can open this to questions. Yeah?
You do have more time.
I do have more time. Good. Great. So let me go back and now dive. So EAP 2028, please talk to me. We need your help. Now let's jump into good. Okay, so this is what the system looks like, right? There is an exchange. There's the StarkDEX services that keeps, the account information and whatnot. There's a prover, a verifier, and then there's a little tip of the iceberg that shows on-chain. It doesn't maintain most of the information. Most of the information is off-chain, and of course, this will raise questions. So on-chain is this sort of orangey area, and off-chain is the white area above. So I want to go over a few of the normal flows and then discuss what happens in the case of a catastrophic failure. So just how much time roughly do I have? 5 minutes. Okay, good. So first of all, user needs to register. So I'm now describing how things are actually working on this alpha system. So a user needs to have some ID that is really a public key, but the public key has to be sort of, Stark friendlier. So it has to be, we chose it to be an ECDSA, but over a Stark friendly curve, rather than the one that, the standard one that just doesn't have sufficiently nice multiplicative subgroups that. So we ask the users to use something that is a little bit more Stark friendly, but not as Stark friendly as we'll get to, let's say, in a year. Okay, good. Now, an exchange also needs to notify us of what tokens are going to be traded there, the banana coins and apple coins and whatnot. And then a very important thing is a vault. So a vault is this basic unit on our system. It is really a triple. It is the user's public key in our system. It is the token ID, let's say banana coin, and it's the amount. Actually, I don't want to use banana coin because I think that is actually a coin. So look, orange coin. Okay. Nothing I say is a solicitation to buy banana coin. Hell no. Okay, so though bananas are actually very good for you. Okay, good. So deposit works like this. So the user transfers funds to the StarkDEX deposit area on chain. Basically, it pays the contract and says, "Hey, I'm paying, and please, put it onto such and such an account or a vault, right?" And the StarkDEX services notices that this happened on chain and sort of takes this into account and says, "We need to include this into our system and modify, the vault." And then we also need to generate a proof that accounts that as well. So that's what happens. This is part of the batch that includes, trades and deposits and withdrawals. And the prover generates a proof for all of this information. Now this goes to the Stark verifier along with the information saying, "Hey, remember that deposit? It's all cool. You can remove it." And then the StarkDEX service notices that the deposit was accounted in the in the current account system, and now it removes this deposit. It has been completed. Good. Withdrawal works similarly, but just in the opposite direction. You request the exchange to extract your funds. You point to a vault. You say, "I want to extract some of these funds." This gets into a message that is sent to the StarkDEX service, which includes it in a batch. This batch is a proof for it is generated. The Stark verifier instructs the StarkDEX service to release these funds, and these funds are then paid back to the address that the user asks for. The main thing that's going on is the trades. So a user trades on the exchange, and the exchange basically says to the StarkDEX service, "Here's a trade that we want to settle. Alice and Bob want to swap orange coin for Apple coin." And this is included in the proof. Proof is generated. The Merkle root of the state of the system is updated, and everyone's happy. Now, let's talk about when not everyone is happy. So what happens if some big explosion occurred and there's no more exchange and no more StarkDEX service, and the users are banging at the doors? We want to see our Apple coins. So what happens is a user makes a request in the normal way to withdraw funds, but there's no response. Everything's shut down. So now the user issues a withdrawal request directly to the StarkDEX service on chain. And now the StarkDEX service allows a grace period to see maybe the system in its usual normal flow can go back to normal. If that doesn't happen, we go into emergency or escape hatch mode. All trading through the exchange terminates until everything has been extracted. And now users can only come and retrieve directly their funds from this. Now, for this to happen, remember that all the data right now is off-chain. We need to have something that lets users know where is their Merkle roots and so on and so forth. And that's the last part of it, which is that, and I want to say, so there are a lot of people here in the room working about scaling and data availability solutions and things like that. So we took a very particular design approach in this alpha. This doesn't mean Starks are hard enough to work with, so we want to focus on Starks. Once you guys reach agreement on what is the right way to deal with massive data, we'll be very happy to accommodate that and modify the things. But right now what we're doing is we're assuming there's some committee that basically asserts that it has the information off-chain on many different sites, and enough folks from the committee have to sign on before you can submit a proof. So again, we could change this once there are other, plasma or whatnot, we could accommodate that. And I think with this I am done. Okay, thanks. Thank you.
So I have the new slides.
Thank you.
So you can double check before.
Yep, that's right.
there have been
You need water, man?
submissions.
I can bring some water. Thank you.
That would be amazing. Thank you.
Summa pretty much is the publishing kind of state of the do you publish the entire state? Or get slides? No, I got the two.
All sunshines and rainbows.
How do I? Yeah, so hi everyone. I'm Dan Robinson. I'm a research partner at Paradigm, which is a crypto asset investment fund, but I'm right here representing my own views, et cetera, et cetera. So this slide is a little bit understated, but don't worry, it gets pretty wild. So this is the Rainbow Network with one rainbow emoji on it. How do I tap forward? What is my?
You have to click on it.
Click on what?
Just click. Yeah, click the mouse. And then use the arrows.
Let me. I see. Nope.
Just here. Right. Yeah, press the right key after you click that. Now press here.
Yep.
Yep.
Thank you. All right. So, okay. So the Rainbow Network is it's an off-chain decentralized synthetics exchange, and it works by composing these two different technologies: payment channels and synthetic assets and synthetic asset positions. So a lot of you are probably familiar with channels, so I'll sort of run through them pretty quickly. So a channel is first you have some collateral locked up on so suppose it's like 10 ETH. And where does ETH live? ETH lives on the chain. What kind of chain? It lives on the blockchain. Problem with the blockchain is that it's relatively slow to do transactions on it. So we need to go up into the cloud, into sort of abstract payment channel land here. And here we just keep track of what these two parties that are involved in this payment channel own. So suppose here Alice owns 5 ETH, Bob owns 5 ETH. And so again, I'm sure almost everyone here should be familiar with how payment channels work, but basically they sign off-chain messages that update their balances to, so that Alice owns like 6 ETH at this point, and now Bob owns 4 ETH. So pretty simple, but really boring. You can see how this is all this gray on this slide. And I promised rainbows, and we will be delivering rainbows later. Okay, synthetics. People might also be familiar with synthetics. Maybe the most popular use of them in blockchain right now is the Maker network, and there's the Dai stablecoin. The way that synthetics work is that you also have some collateral locked up. So here, let's suppose it's 10 ETH. And let's suppose we have these positions that Alice and Bob, so here we're going to be doing a bilateral synthetic. So this isn't like Maker where you have a token that's just sort of issued around. This is a swap between two parties, a derivative that two parties enter into in order to get these particular exposures they want. And so this is heavily inspired by Uma's design for synthetics and synthetic positions. And it's modeled on this idea of a contract for difference or a total return swap. So here, suppose we want to set this up so that Alice has a position where she owns 10 ETH and has negative $500. So this means, in some ways, it means she's gone leveraged long on ETH, some people say, or as you can also say, she's short USD. Alice is short fiat, short the banks, long ETH. And Bob has 500 USD and is flat ETH. So how do they replicate this position using this as their collateral? So for that, we need to know the price of ETH. So I've put up a live screencast from CoinMarketCap up here. So suppose ETH is exactly $250. In this case, Bob's 500 USD is represented, that covers about 2 ETH of this collateral pool. And Alice's position is worth 8 ETH. So if Alice were to exit, if Alice and Bob were to exit this position right now, Alice would only get 8 ETH out because she has 10 ETH but negative $500, and Bob would get out 2 ETH because he's got a position worth 500 USD. So, oh no, the price of Ethereum has crashed to $100, the price of Ether. So what has happened to our collateral positions here? Now, nothing has changed about their positions. They haven't done any trades, but the amount of collateral that's covered by each of their positions, now Alice is only sort of half covered. She gets only half the collateral, 5 ETH out. and Bob gets 500, gets half of the other 5 ETH because that's what 500 USD is worth now. Oh my God! So if ETH is down to $50, at this point now Bob has owns the entire collateral pool. So if it goes any lower, Alice's position is under collateralized here. So there's bigger problems to worry about. If ETH is at $50, like Jesus Christ, it's below EOS. It's down there at number 7. But we'll like in this case, what would have to happen is Alice and Bob would have to exit this position, or at the very least, Bob would now know I'm no longer long USD. Now I have ETH exposure. Now if ETH falls further, I'm going to start losing money. So Bob might have to hedge that position somewhere else. So that's that. Now we're going to combine these two things, channels, payment channels, and synthetics to form this new thing, which has takes advantage of synergies between those, and it's called the Rainbow Network. People familiar reading Rainbows? 90s kids might remember. Okay. So what is a rainbow channel? So rainbow channel, remember with both payment channels and, is there some water somewhere? Can I grab?
There's coffee.
Yes.
Thank you. Yep. This is thirsty work. Okay. Notice that both payment channels and synthetics involved a pot of collateral. So we're going to take advantage of this shared feature. I'm going to say we're going to be using a pot of collateral. We can use it to secure a payment channel, and that payment channel itself is going to have synthetic positions in it. So you still have the payment channel cloud. Alice and Bob have different positions, but instead of just holding balances that are denominated in ETH, they could be holding gold or dollars or Bitcoin or euros or pounds or ETH. Ultimately, this is all still backed by just ETH in the pot of gold, but they can be taking all these exposures that give them positions in these. So let's see how a particular channel works. This is the current state of a channel. So this is just like a balance on it. So normally in a payment channel, you'd imagine just having like 2 numbers representing each party's balance. Here you've got multiple numbers and multiple assets. So it's a mapping from user to asset to balance. This would be a state transition in the payment channel. So this is all done off chain, and look what's happened. So they've done a trade off chain. So this is a case where Alice has bought 2 ETH for 500. I've messed up the numbers here. That one should be 0 up there. Anyway, Alice has bought 2 ETH for $500, let's say, and this is again all happened off chain. So this is a trade that's happened entirely off chain in one single payment channel. We've got shorting going on. Alice is now short one particular asset, USD. It could be anything. She could be short Bitcoin. She could be short gold. She has acquired leverage on her ETH. So now if ETH goes up, she will do better than she would if she just kept the 10 ETH. And she only has, remember, that number can be higher than even the amount of total collateral in the channel as long as it's balanced out by other short positions she has. So that could be like 1,000 ETH if she's really short the dollar, which would be if you have like 100x leverage if you wanted to do that. And one more thing we've added in this is you can track interest in the channel. So this would say whenever you close the channel, Alice has to pay Bob some amount based on the amount of time it's been since they entered into this position. And you can have that be a dynamic number that's computed at the time that you exit. So that's another thing you can do, just all entirely off chain again. And it's settled when you exit the channel. So right until now, I've kind of hand-waved exactly how rainbow channels work. How do they end up settling based on the prices of these other assets rather than on the prices and balances of the collateral? So one way, and one that's in keeping with today's theme, is you can use a price oracle. So if you have a price oracle, it becomes pretty simple. The escrow contract just calculates, here's how much ETH I give Alice, here's how much ETH I give Bob, based on these prices. But there's ways to do it that don't require a price oracle. So one way is physical settlement. And physical settlement, this is a term just from traditional finance, is you have to actually deliver this asset. Rather than, we're not going to cash settle it, we're not going to give you the amount of ETH that it's worth. We're going to say you have to provide the asset itself, or you forfeit all your collateral. The other party gets the entire pot. this only works if you can prove delivery of the asset on chain. So it really easily works with the USD20 tokens or other assets on Ethereum. You can just have them deliver that. But it can also work with Bitcoin, and this was inspired by Summa, which I'm very glad that James was able to give his presentation earlier today. You can use SPV proofs from a Bitcoin transaction saying, look, I show that Alice can provide a proof saying, I show that I've given 1 Bitcoin to Bob, provide this proof to the contract, and that's considered to settle their short obligation in that channel. So that's another way to do it. That limits you, though, again, only to on-chain assets, generally speaking, or ones we can prove settlement. And the third way, and this is one that I think Vitalik had thought of already, is continuous cash settlement. So the way this works is each contract has each portfolio has a particular balance at all points in time that can be pretty easily computed by each of the parties just by looking at their positions and looking at coin market cap and multiplying and adding. If both parties can know what their current price should be, they can just agree every 5 seconds, oh, look, the price has changed by delta. Let's make sure we do a trade that updates this, updates our balances to these new balances. So if my position is worth slightly more, you make a very small payment channel payment to me, basically. What's cool about this is it doesn't require really almost any sophisticated smart contract support at all. So this can actually be done on one of the least sophisticated smart contract platforms, Bitcoin. You can do this on a Lightning Network channel. The disadvantage is you have to stay online and do all these signings. There is this like 5-second free option that you have not to take some particular price change. Although again, if you don't take a price change, then your counterparty can just exit the position. So you've only gained this hopefully small epsilon from that. But one cool thing about this construction is that this is something, these other things you could do on chain. And so you say, okay, yeah, it's nice that this is a Rainbow Channels. You've taken something that's on chain and moved it off chain, and so you can scale it. You can do more of these trades. You can do them for cheaper. But this is something you more or less couldn't do on chain, which is have a synthetic position with no oracle, because you can do that because payments on a payment channel are just so cheap that you can do this 5 seconds. It would just be like basically impossible if you were to try to do this on chain. So this is something that's qualitatively different. That's possible when you're doing this with channels. That isn't really possible when you're doing it on chain. So this leaves us with one more problem that we're going to solve. Suppose Alice has a channel with Bob. Alice can trade whatever she wants with Bob, but what if Bob doesn't always want to be taking exactly the opposite position from whatever Alice feels like trading at that time? So what Bob can do is hedge that. Bob can take the position that his channel puts him in and go enter into an offsetting position somewhere else. So he could do that on an exchange. He could do that on BitMEX, or he can go do it in another rainbow channel. So here we have Bob on the other side of the rainbow. And now Bob's is, so here in this in this channel, Bob is short red, orange, and yellow, and long green, blue, and purple. This is not a solicitation to buy any of those. Bob is long. I just stole Ellie's joke right there. Bob is long red, orange, and yellow, and so that offsets the short position over there. Short these. So Bob is now hedged. So Bob can act as a market maker and basically take any position that Alice wants and go find somewhere else to hedge it. And if there's any position they can't find on the Rainbow Network, they can take the net position there and go trade it on chain, on Uniswap, or they can go to a centralized exchange. So there's a lot of further work that I think I'd like to see done on Rainbow. I'm not implementing Rainbow. If someone wants to, I'd be very excited about working with them. And it's something that I think, at least the very simple form, shouldn't necessarily be that hard, but it's sort of a good way maybe to work through and demonstrate some of the things that a state channel network, state channel framework like Counterfactual or Magmo can do. There's some financial features that Rainbow doesn't really, we haven't really thought through on it. One of them is a margin call, is where if your position gets too close to the margin, can you close it out and get a penalty for that, and charge a penalty basically to the party who didn't up their collateral when the price got close. So figuring out how that should work and what's the best way to do that. Insurance in case your contract goes under collateralized. That's another thing you could imagine sort of buying on the main chain in order to hedge against your channel closures. There's a lot more that you can do. These are the rainbow channels or swaps, and there's a lot more that you can do in sort of the space of derivatives. And you can do this all off chain. You can do it on chain as well, but these include if you have options. If one of the parties has the right to enter into a particular one of these positions, but not the other, you can do futures. You can have these flows. So interest rates are an example, but you could imagine doing other sort of more sophisticated payments calculated based on basically any computable process. But we'd have to really think about sort of the protocol for doing that and some of the details. So I would love to hear people's ideas on that. Capital efficient hedging. This is something I've talked about with Hart from Summa. So one of the problems with this Rainbow network here is that Bob has collateral in both these channels, but it's sort of not doing anything except connecting Alice and Charlie. And this is a constant cost. Like Bob has to keep this all this capital locked up in this particular sort of balanced state. It would be more efficient if Alice and Charlie could just go up against each other. Ideally, you could do that without a full transaction on the main chain, or you could imagine them just sort of being introduced via one transaction on main chain. But figuring out what the best way for that to work, trying to figure out how to properly sort of balance these different positions against each other without the use of a market maker that has to keep their capital open, I think is an open question, a very interesting one. And sort of the final state maybe is transferable synthetics. So the idea. The problem with payment channels is you're locked in them with a particular counterparty. And this ties into the capital efficient hedging point as well. One of the nice things about Plasma is that your channels, your positions on this off-chain become transferable, and transferable with an off-chain transaction. And so I know the Plasma Group people are, this is my name for it, but I know the Plasma Group people are working on thinking about synthetics on, right? All right. On Plasma, and I think that's sort of a very exciting idea because unlike just entering into a synthetic on the main chain and going off chain, you can really actually enter into these positions entirely off chain, do as much trading as you want within one, and then transfer your position in the synthetic. So it's really something magical. I have one more thing that I want to mention. I don't have a slide for, but it's Uniswap. People probably see my hot pink Uniswap swag that Cal made. I'm a big fan of Uniswap. Full disclosure, we're investors in the company. But one thing that I wanted to work on this week was working on hardening the Uniswap price oracle. So this fits both categories today. It's a DEX which could potentially be used to provide a price oracle on chain for ERC20 tokens. So if you're interested in thinking about that problem, if you think it can't be done, Phil, come talk to me, Hayden, Noah, Phil, and anyone else. Because that's something that we'd really love to brainstorm on. And it's something I think that would be a really cool thing that may need to be built into the Uniswap. Thanks, everybody.